It is the final word Border Gavaskar Trophy daily. Not really daily because it's the day after the test match. And for the second time in the year of 2024, there was a draw. And on both occasions around the world where it's been a draw, it's been rain affected. We only got about 2.5 days of actual play in, but it doesn't, Geoff, mean we don't have loads to discuss. We do this for Maurice Blackburn Lawyers, the #1 plaintiff law firm in Australia, and for CBUS Super. Get your super sorted out before the year is done at cbussuper.com.au. Welcome to you. Just a funny, quirky one off the top. There wasn't like an embargo last night. Usually what happens is, I think every test match I've ever covered, this is behind the curtain a bit here, but every test I've ever covered, there's been someone given to the press pack on the night the test match ends so that there is stuff to talk about and write about the day after, just a mechanism used there. Yep. So oftentimes it's the coach or the senior player or something like that. But instead of that, Louis Cameron interviewed Travis Head, and that was presented as the potential to use that interview as the content for the next day. And Louis from cricket.com.au, by the way, who's a great friend of ours and does a terrific job. There's no reflection on that, but more that was the bit to go on with on the next day.
That is a very weird thing to say to reporters. Somebody else from another media outlet has done something, and you can just take that. It's not how it works, not how the structure of things works. So it was peculiar. I don't know why things panned out that way, but I suppose that's a question for the relevant people.
Yeah, I guess I use that as the frame for typically in these eps we would talk about what Andrew McDonald has said, because usually he'd be the guy who does the media.
Sure.
So
you put the coach up for the day after because they give you the context, they do the framing,
exactly.
They talk about what they were trying to do during the match, how they assessed it, what they took out of it, and in the case of a draw where it's rained and where Australia's had the better of most of it and would have been hopeful of pushing for a win but weren't able to do it, then you'd talk about the frustrations with that and where that leaves you in the series and what you need to do for the next couple of games going forward, because it's 1-1. I mean, that's the bit that matters after going through all the details of the game that we did yesterday and momentum and psychological advantage and scars and all that kind of garbage that you have to talk about. There is a series that's 1-1 going into the biggest date on the calendar, with the MCG potentially going to be bursting at the seams on Boxing Day.
So this is primarily going to be a conversation about the Ashwin retirement and our tribute to, I guess, is he our favourite player ever, along with Glenn Maxwell on the podcast? He's got to be close.
Vinny Mankad.
Vinny Mankad, Ravichandran Ashwin, Glenn Maxwell.
They're probably they're the podium. I don't know if you could put them in an order. Maybe they're all equal first, like when like when a rowing team wins a medal and they're all standing on the one step.
So we will have a chat about Ashwin in a sec, but just covering off on the Australian bits and pieces, because we didn't get to go to Cummins Press, so we had to record our podcast. So there is some stuff there. He was asked the McSweeney question in quite a direct way, like, will he play Boxing Day? Is there any scope for change? And he didn't emphatically say yes. He talked about the selectors having, going through their normal process and that type of thing. I'm not saying that McSweeney's doomed, but that's how some have interpreted it, that if Cummins doesn't give an effusive answer there, that it might well be the case that they are considering what they do with that opening spot. And I would understand that, by the way, and this is no overarching reflection on McSweeney as a test cricketer into the future, but Bumrah has got the wood over him, and he's been able to make one very, very important contribution at Adelaide, and I don't want to undermine that in the slightest. The way he batted on that first night was crucial to Australia winning that test match by 10 wickets and squaring the ledger after the disaster at Perth. But, the issue that McSweeney has is that Sam Constas looks $1 million, made 100 against India 2 weeks ago, made a quick 50 on the first BBL opportunity he had. Now that obviously is a different format and so on, but a guy in form's a guy in form, and he just happens to typically play in the same spot that McSweeney plays in. So
yes,
you couldn't rule it out, right?
Darryl Strawberry vibes. You play right field. Yes, I play right field. Yes. Are you better than me? I've never met you, but yes. Could that be the way that things are going at the moment? Look, McSweeney, in a way, he was handed a shit sandwich at the start of the series. Hey, do you want to do a job that you don't actually do in the most difficult way to do it against the best guy in the world to be your opposition? Bumrah's got 20 wickets at an average of 10 in the series. So, I mean,
it's actually more than that. I think I said 20 at 10 yesterday. I got pulled up on that. Apparently it's 22 at less than 10 now or something. But, I'm now forgetting wickets. He's taken so many wickets because
he took
was it
3
9
yesterday.
At Perth?
It might have been
9
19.
at Perth, 9.
I think it was 19 at the start
4.
of the innings.
Yeah, so
22.
so
He got 3 more. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was he was like 11.7, and now he might be down to like 10.1 or something. Anyway,
Yeah,
he's
on track
pretty
for a
bloody
Mitch
good.
Johnson, 13, 14 Ashes type of haul by the time he's finished here. That's for certain. I mean, I just can't see a world where this doesn't continue unless there's a change. And I guess that's the point, right? That McSweeney may well have a long and productive and illustrious Test career. Is he likely to make runs next week against Jasby Bumrah? That's more the question for Australia, right?
Yeah, or just not get out for a long enough period. Even if he could replicate some of those 30s, that would probably be pretty useful. But what McSweeney does have is the relief that at least he hasn't got out to Bumrah every single innings, because he got out to someone else in the second dig at Brisbane. So he doesn't have a Zach Crawley, Matt Henry kind of situation on the cards where he could be clean swept by the same bowler across 10 innings, because that was on. On for a bit. It didn't look unlikely. Maybe he wouldn't mind being taken out of the firing line, but probably not for a Boxing Day test.
And Pat was also asked about Darren Lehmann's comments. So Buff on ABC yesterday was quite to the point, saying that he thinks that Bailey and the team are too close, that there isn't that natural distance. And I suppose physically you can observe that by virtue of the fact that Bailey's wearing the team uniform, he's carrying the team backpack, he's walking in with the team. In fact, yesterday when they were walking into the ground, I was there quite early to do an interview with someone, I can't remember who it was anymore, but he's walking in with Nathan McSweeney. Like, I asked Ian Healy this on our commentary, in the Laurie Saul days there was, and indeed in the Trevor Hohns days, or you want to go back to other chairman of selectors that we've covered in our time, there was more of a natural distance. Now, Cummins was very defensive. Defensive might be the wrong word, but he provided the context around what Bailey's been able to do. And Lehmann's wider point was that if you're too close, it's harder to make tough decisions because you're so immersed in the day-to-day environment. It's difficult to be as ruthless as you might need to be, right? I'm paraphrasing here, and Cummins was like, well, no, that's not the case. Look at Bailey's record since he took over. I think both things can be true at the same time. Bailey has got a great record. The decisions that he's made in charge since Cummins has been captain oftentimes have been perfectly timed, like the Carey being omitted during the World Cup last year is one small example, because Josh Inglis, who no one really saw replacing Carey that quickly, went on to have a crucial role in them winning that trophy. But also, if they do need to make a really tough decision now or before Sydney, the eyes will naturally turn to George Bailey. That's why he's paid to do what he does.
I wonder if it's a causation correlation thing, because this team management has generally been fairly conservative when it comes to sticking with players. They've tended to stick more than shift, whereas other teams go way too far the other way. So you don't necessarily want to aspire to that. I think the optics thing is people just misremembering. I mean, 2019, Trevor Hohns is getting around wearing the team kit during tour matches when they were playing Derby or Leicester or whatever they were doing in gaps between the test matches. That's been part of the furniture for a long time, that if you're the selector on tour, you do. I mean, they make everyone wear it. They make the cricket.com staffers wear it. They make all of the anybody who's attached to the team in any way wears it, basically just so that they can ID you on the field more easily and make sure that the people who have access, who need access to field of play and that sort of thing, aren't going to be held up, and they're more readily identifiable by security and getting on the buses and all that kind of stuff. So, that's not a new thing. It's not like Bailey's pioneered that. That's just part of the way that things work at the moment. But I think there could be, it could be a factor that if you're spending a lot of time with somebody, you're less likely, if you have more of that collegial friendly relationship with, say, Usman Khawaja, you're less likely to say, 3 bad tests, chop, where that might have happened in the past. Whether that's actually a better or a worse thing, I think, is a different argument as to why it might be happening.
Yeah, well, this is it, isn't it? Selection is very rarely black and white. It's almost never black and white. Come to think of it, like there are always arguments both ways. They're cliched as it is, shades of grey, and it's your job as the chief selector or the selection panel to navigate your way through that grey and get to a decision on balance of probabilities. So yeah, don't envy anyone doing it. It's not just a case of totting up a spreadsheet and looking at the bottom column and deciding that that's right and that's wrong. That's Twitter bullshit. That's like, oh, this person averages that and this person averages that, therefore that player should go. That's not real life. That's never really how it works. Anyway, moving to India because we did want to have a chance to spread our wings a little bit on Ashwin. I don't plan on spending an hour doing it, but let's have a 10-minute chat. Let's have it was Jared Kimber who wrote a beautiful tribute, I thought, to Ashwin overnight that said that Ashwin is a very online guy. Like Ashwin does take in stuff. He is a guy who absorbs podcasts and blogs and writing on the game. That constant wanting to improve in any way he can. He's plugged into bits of the sport and the culture of the sport and the discourse around the game that other players typically aren't. That might actually account for why some people don't like him an awful lot because he's pretty badgery, right? It's about as badgery as you can get. In Gideon's piece, he spoke to that idea that he's like immersed in and loves the game so much, and he's devoted his life to sort of unpicking and unspooling, if that's the right word, why things happen within the sport. Which is why we've always had this affection for him. And he's just received an incredible reception upon getting home. Geoff, he's landed and gone straight back to his place, and there are cameras and there is confetti and there is autographs and all of that kind of thing, which will be the start of the celebration of a truly great Test career.
I've got to say that he didn't seem overly chuffed by by the band that was there making cacophonous noises and having to sign a bunch of autographs and so on in his driveway. It strikes me at the moment that Ravichandran Ashwin is not a very happy guy.
Yeah.
And you don't walk away from a career mid-series without there being injury involved if that's not the case. It seemed self-evident yesterday, and some of the reporting that's come out since underlines the assumption, and I think we could see that. We were talking about this indeed even, I think, day one in Perth when he wasn't picked and Washington Sundar was picked instead, and I remember saying at some point during that Test match, this is probably going to cause a lot of difficulties between the new coach who's come in and between Ashwin and Jadeja, who've been left out when you've got such senior and experienced players who've been left out for a specky pick in a spinner who's okay, but not setting the world alight as a younger player. And it seems like, based on the reporting, that was basically it. That was Ashwin saying, you know what, fuck this. Why am I bothering? Why am I coming on a 5-test tour in order to sit on the bench? And it's interesting. I've been mulling over this quite a bit because I think, and whether this is due to my own biases or not, my own preferences or not, because I think if it were a player who I had less regard for who decided to pull the pin halfway through a series, I'd be inclined to be critical. I'd be inclined to say, well, you signed up to tour. You're supposed to see out the tour whether you get picked or not and get to the end of it, and then you make your decision at the end. But with Ashwin, I kind of get it. Now, am I being inconsistent? Maybe I am, but it seems, given the consistency with which he's been mistreated and underappreciated when it comes to overseas touring over a very long and excellent career, it doesn't seem unreasonable that a player of that seniority could say, okay, if you, as he's reported to have done, if you pick me in this squad, am I going to play? Are you bringing me to play, or am I going to be an extra in the squad? And he was told he would play, and then he's not picked for the first test, and he's angry about it. Then Rohit Sharma rocks up after the first test and says, "You're definitely playing in the second one," and insists that he plays, but has to sort of convince him convince Ashwin to play. And then by the third test, he's not picked again, and he says, well, I'm not going to hang around anymore and sit on the bench for the rest of the tour. I'm sympathetic to it, but should I be sympathetic to it? I don't know.
Yeah, well, Gautam Gambhir, as coach, has clearly made this call because, again, according to reports, Rohit Sharma's rocked up in the country and had to play something of a peacemaker with Ashwin, who was keen to, again, this is all the reporting out of India, so we're not finger on the pulse with this as much as we might be if it were the Australian team, say. But he was keen to pull out then at Perth and say, if you're not going to pick me here, if you're picking Washington Sundar here, then, well, why am I part of this? And the suggestion in Sid Monger's piece that this might have been bubbling away after the loss to New Zealand a couple of months ago. And look, maybe it was. Maybe this was on the horizon regardless. But he has been, I would say, criminally underplayed in the senior countries. When you consider the influence that he had in 2018 over here, especially that Adelaide Test match. And I get it the desire to lengthen the batting and to have the extra seamer. But if you are zooming
he
out
did get
from
injured after that test.
No, that's true. But I'm just saying that, it's not just that instance, though. It's so many times that it's been him or Jadeja, right? And they've, or indeed neither
or
of
someone
them,
else.
or someone else, as I said before, Washington Sundar.
I'll run you through it in a minute. I've been looking at this. I forgot the detail on this.
And as well as Harshit Rana started his test career, which we celebrated, knocking over Travis Head on day one was a huge moment. If we do we think that Ashwin was going to have more of an influence or less of an influence had he played that week ahead of either Harshit or Washington? Do we really think that Ashwin, having been such a presence against Australia, was going to diminish the standing of the team? And coming in for the pink ball test and the circumstances upon which he was bowling in, on a little bit of a hiding to nothing there, running into the Travis Head storm, and by that point, Head was already well and truly set. So it's a shame in a way that's the final goodbye for him, because it doesn't reflect, 4 losses in a row to finish his test career for a guy who took 70% of his test wickets in wins. One of the myriad remarkable stats that are doing the rounds. 537 test wickets, but nobody in test history has picked up more left-handers. Has not missed a home test match, has not missed a match in India since 2011. So his value at home was never doubted. But this idea that somehow he lost his magical powers away from Bunson's, when we saw at Ahmedabad, we covered that test match at Ahmedabad last year against Australia, the pride, he was beaming. I spoke to him that night when we were doing the media rounds, when he picked up, was it a 6-wicket bag? I reckon it was in the first innings, because it was almost like a bit of a fuck you. I can do it on a flatty as well, because so much of his career has been played out on flat tracks. The very start was different. It's oscillated. It's changed from a culture where India was a place where you could fill your boots early on, the era where Virat Kohli, for instance, was making bulk runs, to an era where it has been more of a lottery in pitches that have been prepared in India, and he's made the most of that as well. But I think back to 2013, the way he bossed Australia, the way that he and Akshar Patel destroyed England in that series in early 2021, when he was probably at the peak of his powers. But the quirks as well, the white ball reinventions, the fact that he bowled leg spin so often randomly, the carom balls, the over the wicket, the round the wicket, the running out of the non-striker, the way that he helped advance that conversation so dramatically in the short, relatively speaking, short time that he's played the game. In one generation, the way at which we now talk about running out the non-striker compared to what we would have 15 years ago, he's a huge part of that story. So there are so many bits to the Ashwin story that, to me anyway, make him such a compelling character, and why I'm genuinely sad. I saw Harsha last night, and he was like, I'm gutted that this has happened. I feel the same way. I just felt like I wanted. I think you said, what did you say yesterday? The 600 wicket thing. I would have loved him to have done that, and maybe gone past Kumble, and it would have been. And I know that's not everything, but it does feel like this internal schism, and Gambier making this call before Perth has sped things up from what would have otherwise been the natural jumping off point.
It might have, those numbers, had he done that, might have reflected the magnitude of the career more. So, his away from home thing, it's not black and white, because he bowls really well away in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, in West Indies. He's got big test matches and big bags in all of those. Obviously never played Pakistan in a test match and never toured Pakistan, because he's part of that generation who won't. Kohli and Rowett and so on will end their careers never having done so either, which is sad. It's when you look at the records of the past Indian greats, and their records against Pakistan are a big part of that story. And for this generation, that won't be there. That doesn't exist. But if you look at the South Africa, England, New Zealand, Australia record, that's always where it was talked about. And his record's not as good. 72 wickets at 39. It's not dire either. You probably get picked for England or Australia as a spinner half the time, averaging 39 these days. But
anything under 40 as a finger spinner in Australia is a great. If your name's not Nathan Lyon, is a great result, right? And I saw, and there's comparisons to Graham Swan that were doing the rounds yesterday. I mean, Graham Swan he couldn't feel his fucking elbow. They were getting pounded, and he felt like he couldn't bowl anymore. This is not that. This is a lot different to that.
Yeah, and I think, and I probably have been critical of Swan's decision, in that I thought he should have just stayed with the team and seen out the tour. But when you're that down, and Ashwin clearly is really down and upset at at being relegated. I don't know. There's an emotional component to it. So those 4 countries, the more seam-friendly countries, he played 19 of 50 possible tests in those countries across the span of his career, while never missing a test match at home. 2011 plays in Melbourne, Sydney, and Adelaide. Doesn't play in Perth. Presume they went 4 quicks there. They tended to do that in Perth a bit. 2013 played in Joburg, but not in Durban. Then they had a tour of New Zealand, which he didn't play either of the tests. 2014 missed in England, missed Trent Bridge, Southampton, Lords, played Old Trafford and the Oval. 2014 in the Adelaide test in 2014, he misses that. They picked Karan Sharma, remember, the leg spinner who got absolutely pounded. And that'd probably be one of the ones that really, really, really pissed off Ashwin the most. That speculative leg spinner pick. He did play Brisbane, Melbourne, and Sydney, but they were getting towed up then. 2015 to 2018, India didn't play any tests in those countries, and then he goes to South Africa in 2018, plays Cape Town, plays Centurion. Has a really good test in Centurion, takes important wickets when the quicks haven't, makes runs, still gets dropped for Joburg, but it's on that really spicy pitch where India win. Goes to England, plays at Birmingham, Lords, Trent Bridge, Southampton, and then gets injured before the Oval test. So that's one where he probably would have played all 5.
And he was crucial to the win there at Trent Bridge, as I recall. That was the one match they won in that series, and they picked Asia for the 5th test match at the Oval. And again, it's that quirk of them not trusting them to play together when both of their batting records...
He did have an injury problem for that 5th test, so that was part of it in that context. But and that's his first win in any of those 4 countries, is the Nottingham one. And then they get the win at Adelaide as well, and he gets injured during that test match, so doesn't get to play in the rest of that successful series, and was injured, but he would have got dropped for Perth anyway, because Kohli wanted to play 4 quicks at Perth, where Australia went on to lose. So that would have been in the pantheon of Ashwin being left out on tour. 2020, New Zealand, plays in Wellington, doesn't play in Christchurch. And then he plays in the next series in Australia, almost gets the clean sweep. Adelaide, Melbourne, Sydney, his finest hour overseas, really, in Sydney, where he bats out the draw. But he misses Brisbane because he's injured there. Yeah. Right? So there's always this missing out.
Yeah, and that's right. And look, I look at that day in Sydney, right? Like, he was a gutsy player as well. He got bombed like nobody's ever been bombed, I think, in that last 45 minutes when they were just trying to open the game up. Couldn't move. His back was fucked. It's an extraordinary part of the story that Hanuma Vihari and he managed to get through. That one bloke with a torn hamstring, the other bloke who couldn't bend down properly. And that I love those images. We were both lucky to be at the Gabba when India won in 2021 with Ashwin holding up the tricolour flag and being front and centre of those celebrations with Rishabh Pant and Ajinkya Rahane having longed to have been part of it on the actual field. He was there, effectively an assistant coach that week, as it was explained in Bharat's book. So. Yeah, I totally get it. Like what you're describing there, that feeling of not being loved sufficiently away from home, and Gambier being more emphatic about it here by going in other directions.
And there's like the finishing bit to that, and I think probably the bit that stings the most is, so he plays that World Test Championship final later that year, takes wickets, makes runs, they lose. Finally plays a full away series in one of those 4 countries against South Africa in 2021-22, played Centurion, Joburg and Cape Town, and then gets left out of the next World Test Championship final with Jadeja and 4 seamers picked. And I think that would have, if anything, that would have been the thing. His performances drive them to that final based on their home record as well as the few, the things they were able to achieve away, and then he's not picked to play in that final. And then played the Boxing Day test in South Africa last year, got dropped for the next test for Jadeja, and then comes on this tour saying, are you going to play me? Like, I'll come on tour if you're going to play me. And they say yes, and then they don't pick him. So you put all of that together over that span, 19 out of 50 possible tests in South Africa, England, New Zealand, Australia. Why wouldn't you be frustrated?
And to
what
celebrate
might he have done? What might he have done if he'd been given a consistent run? What might he have achieved, someone of his skill and talent?
Yeah, and just pivoting to sort of what he did achieve, though, like at home especially, like that when we rocked up at indoor on that third morning last year, it was like the fact that we could even imagine a world where India would defend 110 or something like that all came down to Ashwin. It was like if Ashwin, and he gets Kawaja's second ball of the day from memory. It's an extraordinary moment, like you're like, wow, this actually could happen. And it was ultimately the way that Labuschagne and Head dealt with Ashwin that defined the test match, right? And got them back not back into the series, but a win there. After the 2 previous weeks, Ashwin and Jadeja bowled them out spectacularly in Nagpur and Delhi. It was an enormous triumph for those 2 veterans with such immense records against Australia that they started the series and went 2-0 up before Australia had even found their feet. Which wasn't unusual. I remember that interview that he did with Vic Marks in 2018 when they were visiting, and it kind of goes to that point that I was referring to before around his obsessive nature with finger spin. Like what a true master of his craft. There was nothing this guy didn't try, and he was obsessed with it. He is obsessed with his primary craft, which is bowling finger spin, and I really admire that. Like a lot of cricketers have this sort of diffident perspective on what they do. It's almost like it's a God-given thing. And, I do this thing, but I don't care too much for it. Now, a lot of times that's a misrepresentation of how they actually feel. It's more like they try and give the impression they don't care too much about it because it makes them sound cooler, I suppose. But he never shied away from being, as I touched on before, being a full-on obsessive with what he did and loved it. And he was kind of like us. And it's that Jared Kimber thing. He's kind of like us and vastly better at what he does than we are at what we do. But there is a relatability there to someone who, and that's kind of why I've always been drawn to Maxi as well, by the way, because Maxi's kind of like us as well. Like he is obsessed with cricket and, and obsessed with every single beat of every single day and improvement, constant self-improvement. And I think that has a lot to do with the Ashwin story. He says he wants to stay involved in cricket. I have no idea in what capacity. He's had enormous success on YouTube. But I mean, is it just that? Does he want to go and join the commentary box? If he does, good luck to him. But, is it inconceivable that Ashwin could go on to be an outstanding administrator? He's an incredibly intelligent, articulate man. He clearly isn't going to completely divorce himself from the game. Might it be that he can do things that are for the betterment of the game more widely? In our live show last week, Harsha spoke about over time how India might evolve in the way that they oversee the global game. And I'm really interested in that idea that, we are often critical about the way that India governs the global game at the moment, but it might feel differently in 5 or 10 or 15 years' time. Might Ashwin be part of that? If he is, I think that'd be a great thing. So, yeah, there's a lot here with him. A lot's clearly happened since they arrived in Australia a few weeks ago, which is why he's already back at home. And that is sad. But ultimately, I just feel like what we were able to see with him on the field, I don't imagine there'll be many other cricketers in our lifetimes who will leave such a lasting impression in so many wide and varied ways.
Yeah, I mean, there won't be a lot of cricketers who'll have the opportunity to play that many games. I think we'll see fewer 100 Test players into the future than we have seen over our lives up to this point. 106 Tests for him, so he did make that landmark despite being left out so many times. And could have played 140 if they'd actually picked him for most of the tours.
And just one last thing, that kind of unusual comment that he made in the presser. He didn't really do the presser. He just gave a statement and mic drop, off he goes. About being one of the OGs. Like I kind of took something out of that. Like he sees himself as being part of a slightly earlier generation, which stands to reason, right? He's 38. But I mean, obviously he played in the IPL throughout. And yet, like that moment at the MCG when he left that ball against Pakistan, like that's an iconic Ashwin moment. He was a T20 player as well. He will remain a T20 player into the future. I've no doubt about that. He spoke about still playing club domestic cricket and so on, and why wouldn't he fill his boots on that front? But yeah, like the idea that he is of this generation of Indian players that took them to the top of the world. How important row it was in the last few weeks. Virat Kohli, who did kind of make me think, might he be the first of a couple of players who go, oh, actually, the next generation is now taking over. Maybe it's time for us to depart in more of a group, kind of akin to what we've seen with Australian greats finishing at the same time. I'm not wishing Coley to retire, I hasten to add. I think it's interesting watching Coley try and find a way. But yeah, that did cross my mind when he said that comment, like, because Coley would meet that criteria as well, wouldn't he? Like one of those group, the OG group, the originals from his time in Test cricket. I mean, you're only really looking at in that team, him, Coley, Rohit Sharma, and maybe Jadeja at a pinch. So yeah, just a little side thought on that.
Yeah, and they've a bunch of them retired from the T20 format after the T20 World Cup win, so that's one format they're already not playing for India. I can't really see anyone retiring from Test cricket and only playing ODIs. That's probably not really a viable path forward. No. Although I suppose the Champions Trophy is there. They might want to see if they can sneak a little bit of extra silverware, but before they call it off. But in a way, I quite liked the thinking from Ashwin. I think partly was he did make that mention about let someone else have a go. There would be younger players for whom sitting on the bench during a tour of Australia would be the highlight of their cricketing lives so far. And for him, it's a frustration and a disappointment. So there is some logic to that as well. Why not create the space in the side so that even if you're not in the 11, so that somebody else can get something out of that experience of being a tourist that he's already had enough times.
Geoff, before we go, Kabaddi on the 28th of December. That was quite fun last night talking about that for way too many minutes. Come and join us. You want to get some nice sunglasses? Come and do that. Here are the casual ones that we wear. The Glenn Maxwell, they've got the T20, the 2020 branding on the side as well. So they're t20vision.com. What I noticed today about these sunglasses, I've flown with my family to where my parents live in Western Victoria, down through from Brisbane to Avalon today. And they're resilient, these bad boys, because I tell you what, when you've got two little kids and you're trying to get from where you are staying to the airport and then onto a plane, and you've got the glasses the whole time, and they did not break. They did not wilt. They are still in good nick because they are good sunglasses. So t20vision.com/finalword. Get a 10% discount on some robust but very sexy sunglasses between now and Christmas Day.
Robust and stylish. That is all we have ever tried to be on the final word. We've got a big few days coming up. Keep an ear on the feed. There'll be our Melbourne live show on the 22nd with Richard Ponting. You may have heard of him, and Glennifer Maxwell. They will be joining us on stage. It's Maxie's book launch. Ponting will be doing the honours and we'll be having a conversation with us on stage. So that's all happening. There'll be our Christmas special show coming up in the feeds and other things as well. So if you're seeing this on the video, find the audio podcast feed in one of your apps, subscribe on there. Go to patreon.com/thefinalword. Lots of ways to get involved. And on we go towards the festive end of the year.
Sounds good to me. Ashwin, you've been a gem. We'll see you around, and we will see you around as well, as you say, with many episodes between now and Boxing Day. Bye.
Bye.